All right, today we're going to be looking at a book called The Obesity Code, written by medical doctor James Fung back in 2016. Well, the book was published in 2016. It became very popular, and I'm here to debunk it and explain why the book is incorrect and why you should not always believe everything you read or hear. So, today's going to be an honest look at the data. So let's be fair. Let's be fair. Let's go over things that I completely agree with out of the book. The two main things that I totally agree with are eating healthy whole foods and cutting out processed and refined foods. Anybody in their right mind is going to agree with that. So, the claims of the book. Basically, that conventional wisdom surrounding obesity is incorrect, and in its place, the book puts forward its own claim that it's the insulin sensitivity and hormone imbalance model of obesity, which has been debunked in the past on other platforms and by other people. So claims, there are three of them. First one, that increasing insulin sensitivity via low-carb dieting and intermittent fasting is the best way to lose weight. Claim 2, that restricting calories does not induce weight loss. Claim 3, that intermittent fasting is the optimal way to lose weight and maintain hormonal balance, specifically focused on insulin. So we're going to talk about why these are wrong, or some of them are at least partially wrong. Increasing insulin sensitivity via low-carb dieting, yes, that is true. That does happen. However, the effect of insulin sensitivity increasing, meaning that you are getting better, right? Your type 2 diabetes is beginning to subside, to keep it simple. There is an acute response, right? I mean, short-term response, okay? So we're talking like a couple weeks at the most of going totally low-carb, right? Whether, it's keto or, whatever that might be, for increasing insulin sensitivity, okay? Making your body work more effectively, more efficiently. I have not come across any studies whatsoever that have talked about whether that acute response lasts long-term. And that intermittent fasting is best. This is popular with the CrossFitters and everybody. Let's run through a couple quotes from the book, and after each quote, I'll run through a couple different research studies. I try to use meta-analyses when possible, and all the research studies that I'm going to go over are randomized clinical controlled trials. They're not epidemiological studies. I'm not conflating correlation, causation, none of that. And none of this is my opinion. Well, it's my opinion because the research, right? So I get my opinions and I draw my conclusions based on what the researchers conclude. So quotes from the book. Let's start from the bottom. So page 29, a 30% reduction in caloric intake results in a 30% decrease in caloric expenditure. The end result is minimal weight loss. So I'd love to see where he got this information from. I have not found it. I've looked. But having a 1-to-1 ratio in caloric restriction to caloric expenditure, I've never heard of this. If that was a thing, then something that simple and that easy to say seems like it should have filtered its way down into the level of bro science and kind of become everyday spoken word, common wisdom sort of thing at the gym. And I've never heard that. So let's look at a calorie restriction study. Calorie restriction meta-analysis. This is from PMC, U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health. So it's from the NIH. Calorie restriction in humans and update. All these studies that I talk about are going to be linked in the description down below. You can check them out for yourself if you want. So let's read the abstract real fast. Calorie restriction, a nutritional intervention of reduced energy intake but with adequate nutrition, has been shown to extend health span and lifespan in rodent and primate models. Accumulating data from observational and randomized clinical trials indicate that caloric restriction in humans results in some of the same metabolic and molecular adaptations that have been shown to improve health and retard the accumulation of molecular damage in models of longevity. So in particular, moderate caloric restriction in human ameliorates, does away with multiple metabolic and hormonal factors that are implicated in the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer, the leading causes of morbidity, disability, and mortality. So caloric restriction seems to be efficacious, helpful, beneficial, good for helping to mitigate things such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. That's what we got so far. That's straight from the abstract. In this paper, we will discuss the effects of caloric restriction in non-obese humans on these physiological parameters. Special emphasis is committed to recent clinical intervention trials that have investigated the feasibility and effects of caloric restriction in young and middle-aged women on the same parameters. And we're going to go look at those studies right now. I've highlighted them. Scroll down, keep scrolling. Where'd they go? I had them highlighted. Now I got to find them again. Okay. Oh, interesting. They actually have the Minnesota semi-starvation experiment, which is the exact experiment that James Fung cites in his book as the reason why fasting is good. And actually, he misrepresents the data. We're not going to go through that because that's cherry picking the easy stuff. So let me find the right ones. And here they are. Okay. Randomized clinical trials, not the observational ones, were initiated by the U.S. National Institute of Aging to provide first controlled clinical trials of CR, which is caloric restriction, with adequate nutrient provision in healthy non-obese humans. In the first section, 3 pilot studies were performed to evaluate the feasibility and effects of CR on metabolic health after 6 months. So you calorically restrict for 6 months, what happens? They got to this caloric restriction through 3 different ways, okay? And remember these because they're going to be important. 3 different modalities. The first one is reduced calorie intake, the most common, calorie counting, MyFitnessPal, etc. Second one is an increase in energy expenditure. So you keep calories the same, you do a lot more exercise. And the third one, you put both together. You calorie count, you restrict calories, and you exercise at the same time, which is hard, but definitely doable. In the trials, these people were mostly overweight, and their body mass index dropped. So their BMI dropped from being overweight into the normal range. Granted, they were in the upper limit of the normal range, but they went from overweight to normal on the BMI scale. The results of these studies were collated, and thereafter a phase 2 multi-center trial was conducted to investigate the efficacy and safety of 2 years at 25% caloric restriction. That's a lot. That's difficult in leaner and younger men and women. Study enrolled 220 healthy young middle-aged people, 21 to 51 years old, non-obese, tested the effectiveness of CR on energy, metabolisms, and blah, 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 and quality of life. Okay, let's run through the next. I'm going to try to do this quick because we're already at 9 minutes. And the longer videos don't go very well on YouTube. All right, let's jump to another quote. Let's go page 39. The body must at some point reduce its caloric expenditure to meet the lower caloric intake. It just so happens that this adaptation occurs almost immediately and persists long term. So he's saying that because your body adapts when you have different calories, right? So if you're really skinny and you eat a lot of calories to try to gain weight, after a certain period of time, probably, it's usually give or take a couple weeks, right? So like 2 to 3 weeks, your body's going to get used to that, and it's going to account for that, and you're going to increase your energy expenditure to try to stay at your skinny weight. If you're overweight and you calorically restrict, your body's going to lower its energy expenditure, meaning you're going to exert less energy throughout the day. You're going to do less things, do less work to try to stay at that same overweight level. This is known. It's not like a surprise thing. This is not like a novel new finding. It's been known for a long time. And let's run through. I've got a couple studies on this. I'll publish them. I'll post them all down below, but we're just going to run through one. This is from MDPI. This is nutrients. Resistance training prevents muscle loss induced by caloric restriction in obese elderly individuals. A systematic review and meta-analysis. So let's take the worst of the worst, right? Or, the best of the best in this case, right? We're going to take old people who are obese, people who are really struggling in life, right? Who maybe have some serious negative health indicators because of their weight and their age coupled together, okay? So if it was not possible to increase your energy expenditure while being calorically restricted for a longer period of time, these people would not be able to do it. It remains unclear as to what extent resistance training can attenuate or mitigate muscle loss during caloric restriction, or CR. Interventions in humans, the objective here is to address whether resistance training could attenuate muscle loss induced by caloric restriction in obese elderly individuals through summarized effects of previous studies. So this is a meta-analysis. Databases Medline, Embase, and Web of Science were used to perform a systematic search between July and August 2017. So this was published, I believe, in 2018 because it had to go through peer review and all that. And they were included in the review, randomized clinical trials comparing the effects. So these are only randomized clinical trials. So these are really good studies, ideally. Comparing the effects of CR with CR-RT and just RT. CR is caloric restriction, RT is resistance training, and CR-RT is obviously the two of them put together. And they measured lean body mass, fat body mass, and total body mass. The diet that they used for 24 weeks was 55% carbohydrate. So Jason Fung would probably argue that this is a high carbohydrate diet. 15% protein, which I personally think would be too low if you're trying to lose weight because of the thermic effect of protein. With the nitrogen compound, you have to burn roughly 25% of the calories that you eat from protein just to metabolize it. So that's very helpful for weight loss. And then 30% fat. So resistance training reduced 93.5% of caloric restricted induced lean body mass. So when you lose weight, you also lose muscle, not just fat. There's a ratio. Everybody's ratio is slightly different. But in these people, doing resistance training, and you have old obese people, which means they're not out there doing deadlifts and squats. They're probably using resistance bands and maybe a bike and a stepper and some other lighter things, okay? And that alone was able to reduce 93.5% of lean body mass loss while in caloric restriction. That's wild, okay? And it also means that when you're in caloric restriction, yes, it's possible to also increase your energy expenditure, believe it or not. Furthermore, to address muscle quality and change in strength, our conclusion is that CR-RT, caloric restriction and resistance training together is able to prevent, quote, from the study, almost 100% of caloric restricted induced muscle loss while resulting in fat body mass and body mass reductions that do not significantly differ from caloric restrictions. So if you're just calorically restrict and count calories, you're going to lose weight. You're also going to lose lean body mass. If you calorically restrict and do resistance training, you're going to lose less lean body mass and probably more fat mass, especially in people who are old and obese. Okay, let's go to the next one. Page 41. The key assumption of the theory that reducing caloric intake leads to weight loss is false, since decreased caloric intake inevitably leads to a decreased caloric expenditure. We just talked about that. Sorry. Let's go. Same page, 41. The portion control caloric reduction diet is virtually guaranteed to fail. Eating less does not result in lasting weight loss. So this is just absolutely incorrect. I I don't understand how a medical doctor could say something like this. It's absolutely mind-boggling. These people, the study that we just read, old obese people were fed 55% carbohydrates and asked to exercise a little bit. And guess what? They lost weight. And if you do that over time, even if you have cheat meals, a cheat day, a cheat week, and you go back to your diet, over time, the aggregate of that time, you will have lost weight and have kept it off. The only variable there is you and how disciplined you are and how able you are to strictly adhere to your diet. So the last quote for today, page 43, caloric reduction as the primary means of weight loss has disappointed repeatedly. This is partially true, but mostly false. And so we're going to end with this, okay? There are many different kinds of studies, especially in the nutrition world. There are things like randomized clinical controlled trials, double-blind placebo trials, observational studies, and then there are also things called epidemiological studies, okay? Which is like you get called up on the telephone and someone's like, hey, do you eat X, Y, and Z? And you say, yes, I do. And they say, hey, how much do you weigh and how tall are you? And they get your BMI, and then they can put you in as a statistic, and then you're part of a data set that says, oh, people that eat lots of Oreos are overweight. Does that mean that eating Oreos make you fat? No, it does not. This is confusing correlation and causation, which is logical fallacy 101. Don't do it. And apparently this guy does it. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you learn in high school, or at least, your first year of college, let alone post-grad and doctoral stuff. So, oh man, I don't even know where to start. If you, over time, so here's the takeaway, right? Here's the truth as seen in the data, okay? From all the studies I've read today, I'll post them all below, and almost any other study you can find, okay? If you reduce calories to a point that is below your energy expenditure, okay? So you are in a caloric deficit, okay? You will lose weight. And if you are able to do that over a long period of time, you will continue to lose weight and keep that weight loss. You'll keep it going. You're going to keep the weight off. You can achieve caloric deficit, whether it's by increasing your exercise and keeping your calories the same. You can do it by fasting, intermittent fasting. I've done intermittent fasting a couple times. Sometimes I skip breakfast. Guess what? I just don't feel hungry in the morning sometimes, so I don't eat. And it's not a problem for me. So part of my lifestyle, that's easy for me to do. But because it's easy for me to do, I can strictly adhere to it, which means that if I was trying to lose weight, which I'm not, I would be able to keep the weight off. Other ways you can do it, high protein diet because of the thermic effect of food, right? So you burn 25% of the calories you get from protein just trying to metabolize it. You can do it through low-fat diet, low-carb diet, keto, fasting, whatever, doesn't matter. If you get to a caloric deficit, over time, you will lose weight, no matter what. That is literally the definition of caloric deficit. Calorie is simply a unit of measurement. It's technically the measure of energy that is contained within a substance. Food, for example, that is required to increase the degree of a gram of water by 1. That's it. And you put the food into a calorimeter and you burn it and you see how much energy you get out of it. So it's literally the same as saying like this light bulb right here lights up 75 watts. It's the exact same thing. So if you are in a caloric deficit, you will lose weight. Doesn't matter how you do it. It will happen. Obviously, I would recommend doing it in a healthy way, not eating Oreos, right? But eating healthy, whole foods, okay? Not drinking too much soda and drinking more things like water and black coffee or whatever, right? And I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not going to tell you what to eat. All I'm going to say is, this is what the data says. And the data says something that is opposite to what Jason Fung has said in his book, The Obesity Code.